Hi there. Thank you for joining me for today's live reading of Where the Ocean Meets the Sky by A.R. Hadley, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Part 1, Landslide. Perception, the way we see the world. Double doors, revolving doors, movement, change, paradoxical shift, universe tilts. I glide down the star slide and land at your feet. On my feet, riding on the tail of a lackluster comet. 1. June 2014. Keep calm. The dice hanging from the rearview mirror of the cab mocked her without mercy. How many times had she read those two words? 1,000,000. She could not keep calm. Calm was bullshit. A lie. She hated labels, but the complacent doctor had slapped her with one anyway. 2 awful words encompassing a mess of complications. Panic, disorder. It sounded like knots tangled up inside a dirty throw rug. The cab was dirty and small, or she was shrinking, scrunched down, jeans tight against her thighs. It smelled, too, like the waiting room of a doctor's office, latex and sanitizer trying to mask people's filth. She stared out the window. South Florida whizzed by as she twirled a piece of hair around an index finger. The noises inside her head grew louder than the traffic. I am afraid. Afraid if she put away the phone clutched in her palm, the device both a comfort and a distraction, a child's favorite blanket or a smoker's pack of Marlboros, she would think. Of anything. Of everything. Thinking was out of the question. Thinking led to feelings. A friend once told her every thought was derived from a single feeling. So, which came first? The thought or the motherfucking feeling? Maybe this was only the perception of her feelings anyway, her unique interpretation creating her reality. There was no reality, and perception was a dream. It was all a dream. A Dorothy in the Land of Oz, house spinning inside a tornado, hypnotizing dream. If she closed her eyes, she could see her there, sitting on her left. Not Dorothy Gale, but her mom, Beverly. Her dad on her right. She'd been sandwiched between her divorced but somewhat amicable parents in the backseat of a New York City cab less than a week ago. When are you going to Miami? Beverly asked, stale cigarette smoke from her mom's clothes wafting into the graduate's nose. I told you, Mom, 1,000,000 times. Friday. This Friday? Yes. You've asked her enough questions, Beverly, Albert said, squeezing his daughter's hand. Let her be. It's Annie's day. The college graduation, celebration, and congratulations hadn't been able to drown out the regrets, the what-ifs, the death. It hadn't obliterated the passive-aggressive behavior of her mother or the sadness still palpable in the grip of her father's palm. Every conceivable emotion had taken over the empty space of that cab days ago, and they consumed her again now in the seat of a different taxi, filling the vat no one spoke of, the pores, the tiny holes, the inconspicuous places in and all around, between the handshakes, the glances, the hellos and hi, how are yous, making innocuous replies to friends and strangers with the infamous line, I'm doing so fine, for the 100th time, I think I'll puke. And she had puked. Plenty. She'd secretly puked and perspired and gone nearly crazy for months before the ceremony. But she'd had to make college graduation. Had to. For him. A ghost. Did he still know her? Could he see her? Did she even know herself? Who was she? She thought she knew who she was. Always. She was 9 going on forever. She was resilient. Iron, steel, until death had broken her. A measly little shard of kryptonite had split her open and exposed her. What a joke. Life, reality, perception. Who was she? Annie Baxter. The dreamer, the romantic, the optimist, the born photographer, a daughter, a sister, the sky. She was blue, blank. She was broken. Nothing but atmosphere kept her from floating off into an endless, oxygen-deprived universe. Miss? The driver cleared his throat. Annie swallowed and looked out the window. Branches of palm trees swayed in the wind. The cab had apparently pulled into the Allens' driveway. Thank God some of the shaking had subsided. Her breathing regulated. She would disguise the panic, take back the summer, starting now. This was her summer. Mine. 1,000 miles from New York City. Direct, daily access to sun and surf. An immediate distraction from thinking and feeling, except what good was a photographer who didn't feel? And who was she kidding? Annie felt everything. Miss? The man interrupted again. She peeled her eyes from the 2-story brick home with frontage on the Atlantic Ocean, one of the few remaining places on Florida's coastal highway without high-rises or condos, only homes, Maggie had informed her. Can I help you with your bags? No, thank you. Annie smiled, stepped out, grabbed her carry-on, and slung her backpack over her shoulder. The smell of freshly cut grass lingered in the air, mixing with the redolence of the ocean. Bees buzzed in her stomach as she made her way to the porch, ready to greet 2 old friends. Friends she hadn't seen since the funeral. Think about something else. Pinching her lid shut, she knocked on the door, willing the optimist within her to win out over the anxiety-riddled stranger who had occupied her psyche for months. Kiddo, John said the moment the door swung open, a wide smile on his face, his blue-gray eyes twinkling. Hi, Annie grinned. John kissed her cheek as they embraced, then he inched away, looked over his shoulder, and called out, Mags, as he grabbed the suitcase handle. Come in, sweetheart. Annie had nearly forgotten the endearing sound of his voice, his drawl, the Georgia accent ever apparent, especially in his sweet sentiments. Let me get this. Is this all you brought for the summer? Yeah. Annie stepped over the threshold, backpack still over her shoulder, her eyes wide as she surveyed the foyer. Maggie would need several, he chuckled, and they would all be very heavy. What would Maggie need? The cat asked as she descended a spectacular white staircase, her auburn curls dancing and hips swaying. Luggage. Lots of luggage, John replied. Annie only brought 1 suitcase. Maggie hit the ground floor in a bounce and a squeal. Your hair! She fanned out some of Annie's caramel-colored strands. It's gotten so long. You look so pretty. Somehow, the 2 of them managed to make her feel like a kid again. A kiddo. 9 or 10 years old, and squished between them on their couch watching Toy Story for the umpteenth time. She preferred the cowboy and astronaut to Ariel or Cinderella. I decided to grow it out, Annie blushed. It hasn't been this long since I was 16. I know, Maggie's brown eyes sparkled. I remember. You still seem 16 to me, John sighed. That's because you're old, Maggie winked. Annie missed that adorable wink too, having first been on the receiving end of it and Maggie's devotion around the age of 9, spending afternoons, evenings, and eventually the entire night at the Allens high-rise in Seattle. For a time, Maggie and John had been granted guardianship of Annie. Months when Beverly couldn't be bothered to adult or had entered another treatment center, or she'd been drunk morning to midnight, or perhaps she hadn't given a fuck. Annie's dad perpetually worked, had been on the verge of marriage number 3, and never fought for custody of their only child. Albert had cheated. Her mother had won. Thank God Maggie stepped forward when everyone else had stepped back. Almost everyone. Annie's brother, he'd been... Yeah, John grumbled, tilting his head toward his wife, jolting Annie from her childhood memories. People mistake me for her father. His signature laugh followed. No, Annie shook her head. Really? No, they don't. It's your hair, honey. Maggie touched the tips of her husband's shiny silver locks. He'd grayed early. I tell him all the time he looks hot. You both look good, Annie smiled. You mean for our ages, Maggie grinned. I didn't say that. Annie mentally counted back to 1998, trying to come up with exactly how old they were now. You're the one who looks good, sweetheart. Maggie rested a hand on Annie's shoulder. The year has been good to you. Maggie spoke those words like a question or an affirmation or like some sort of dreamy consolation, her chocolate brown eyes swinging back and forth like the pendulum of a grandfather clock. Good to you, Annie thought. What does that even mean? She glanced at John, but he remained quiet, shifting his gaze to the no, don't look at the floor. The last year, what had it been? Had it been good? Annie had neglected to tend to the good. The last year meant surviving, face pressed up against the glass of a passenger train window, life zooming by at the speed of light, panic and medication replacing parties and commitments, scattered ashes usurping sunshine. Good to her? Not if you considered pills, studying all hours of the night, hiding and escaping while literally breathing into a paper bag good. Anxiety rushed in, overtaking the sensible part of her brain, constricting her stomach in the center of her friend's pretty little foyer, the exact scenario she'd attempted to avoid in the cab, always avoiding, until she couldn't see straight. But seeing the two of them again, John and Maggie Allen, what had Annie been thinking? Making the decision to temporarily move to Florida and exhibit her photographs, to start over. Everything came back. And this time, she couldn't stop it. Acid shot up her esophagus. Her throat tightened. The day was as new as it was stale and old. Annie, did you hear me? Her father cried into the phone over and over and over. The sister and daughter and daydreamer stood mute and frozen in the center of Tabitha's kitchen, staring at a lamp on a table in the living room. Annie, Annie. Has it been a year? John uttered, interrupting the horrid memory. The day her life irrevocably changed. I wish we could have seen you sooner, kiddo. I wish we could have made it up there for your graduation. Maggie explained everything. Annie touched his arm, recalling John had recently attended a funeral. I'm sorry for your loss. Enough of this sorry and sorrow, John mumbled, his accent subtle, yet strong, imbibing each syllable with love. Come on to the kitchen. We'll have a drink. I want to reimburse you for your cab fare, Maggie said as the three of them started to walk. No, Annie stopped and looked, the cat dead in the eye. John coughed. Absolutely not. It's bad enough you wouldn't let me pick you up at the airport, Maggie whined. I'm surprised she listened to you, kiddo. John chuckled and turned to his wife. She's 25 now, Mags. I know, Maggie sighed and linked her arm through Annie's as they began to stroll again. Annie glanced around, getting lost in the architecture, her eyes climbing the staircase, the expansive ceilings. What are you thinking in that head of yours? Maggie asked. That she was glad she'd chosen to pay her own way here, that she was happy to be seeing them both like this, relaxed and at home, not to mention she'd longed for the quiet of the car after the noise of the plane ride. That your house is beautiful, Annie replied instead, diverting her attention to the chandelier hanging over a large walnut dining table in a room off to their right. I keep forgetting you haven't been here before. Maggie eyed the second floor. Do you want to see your room now? My room? Yours for the entire summer. No, I'll wait. Annie smiled. My room. My summer. I would like something to drink, though. That's my girl, John said as the three of them rounded the corner into the kitchen. He rested Annie's carry-on at the end of another staircase, one with rustic, dark brown steps, planks that matched the flooring. Its landing met the nook, kitchen, and an enormous open living area. You must be tired, getting up so early for your flight. Maggie held the refrigerator door open. I'm okay. Annie placed her backpack on one of the bar stools tucked beneath the high countertop. What do you want to drink? John asked. We have orange juice, iced tea, water, Maggie offered. Annie only blinked, her eyelids flitting like the press of a Nikon shutter. The windows, the view, rendered her speechless. Not windows, but walls, taking up the entire rear length of the home. The deck, the sand, the ocean were all more beautiful than she had imagined. I think she wants a drink, Mags, John said, but Annie hardly heard a word. She found herself in front of a set of tall French doors, warmth already covering her entire body. With no curtains or blinds to conceal the sunshine, Addie had to hold a hand above her eyes to continue peering outside. Her camera rested in her backpack, but she wanted to see the water like this, with her naked eye first, without a lens or obstructions. It's beautiful, Annie uttered. No matter how many times she'd seen the ocean, the majesty of it never ceased to spoon against a part of her she believed no one else could be. Do you want to take a better gander? John smiled and opened both doors. This is all private access. A burst of air swept in, swooshing around Annie as she stepped onto the deck and leaned into the sun, hips forward, hands in her jeans pocket, the Florida heat hitting her body like a brick, enveloping her from head to foot. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them. Her entire summer would be spent here, On this beach, her first real summer since her brother, no, 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 not now. If she didn't think it or say it, he would remain alive. Shrugging off sadness, breathing in possibilities, smelling humidity and salt and creativity, Annie cast off worry and inhaled summer's promise. The sensation traveled through her lungs violently, wildly, with a feverish independence. Annie looked back at John and grinned. I'd love some wine. Then I think I'll take that walk. This had been a good decision, coming here, being with old friends, moving over 1,000 miles from New York City, continuing to distance herself from her home state of Washington. The change, although planned, somehow felt serendipitous.